One winter morning, a lonely cowboy found a child on his doorstep, barely alive beneath the snow. The child didn't speak. He just held tightly to an old rattle in his hand. And the next day, 70 women on horseback came and surrounded his home. Why were they there? Who was this child? And what promise made years ago and long forgotten was the cowboy now bound to keep? This is a story about how saving a stranger can awaken the memory of an entire people. A tale of loyalty, regret, and a silent bond that slowly grows. If you're ready for a story that will touch your heart, let's begin. By the way, we noticed something small. Most people who watch these stories aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Maybe we get caught up in the moment or just forget to hit the button. But your support truly helps us keep creating stories like this. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. The winter wind was whipping the bare branches like a lash, and the sky had turned gray so much so that the line between earth and sky had almost vanished. The falling snow wasn't coming down in gentle flakes, but in heavy clumps, as if carrying the weight of some fury. Emil Hartmann opened his door with its broken hinge and looked out at the flattened whiteness. The old tin mug in his hand, still steaming with bitter coffee, was shaking. His eyes were as dull as the drops sliding off the icicles hanging from the roof. But that morning, something caught his eye. At first, it was just a shadow just past the fence, a barely visible shape under a mound of snow. Could be a wolf, maybe a mountain fox, or just a trick of the eye on a morning full of ghosts. But the shadow moved. Emil set the mug down on the porch, turned back inside, and took his rifle off the wall. He pointed the barrel forward, not to shoot, just to see what was real. Every step he took crunched the snow beneath him, waking old memories he kept buried. Fallen horses, screaming women, children lost in the smoke. As he got closer, he couldn't believe his eyes. A child lay under the snow. 13, maybe 14 years old. Long hair, braided in two, with a leather headband decorated with feathers. His skin was bruised, his forehead sweaty with a mix of blood. A broken arrow tip was lodged in his right leg, buried in the snow. Emil knelt down. The child opened his eyes, but there was no hate in them. Just exhaustion, and a kind of loneliness that had already made its peace. "Look what this world's done to you," Emil muttered to himself. "Even as a kid, you're already seen as the enemy." He pulled the arrow out carefully. The boy didn't scream. Emil let out a breath. Some pain goes beyond screaming. He picked him up, carried him gently back to the cabin. The fireplace inside was dying out, but it was still warmer than outside. He laid the boy down on the fur rug, boiled water right away, soaked some old linen strips, and dressed the wound. The blood was thick and dark, reminded him of the color of soil. And then Emil realized this kid wasn't just freezing. He was running, and someone was looking for him. Maybe more than one. The kid didn't speak all night, but his eyes followed Emil every move, every step. When morning came, the storm was still raging outside. But inside, there was a new kind of silence. Unsafe, but full of something like hope. Emil placed his old boots by the fireplace. "I used to wear these when I was young," he said. "Might be a little big on you, but give him a try." The boy didn't look at the boots. He kept his eyes on the window. Emil asked, "You planning to leave?" Silence. Then the boy made a short gesture with his hand. He drew a circle, then touched his fingers to his eyes. "You're being watched," the motion said. "You're surrounded." Emil sighed, glanced at his rifle but didn't reach for it. "They sent me here, didn't they?" he mumbled. The boy nodded slowly. Emil flinched for a second. "Who?" he asked. "Who sent you?" The boy pulled a small leather pouch from inside his coat. Inside was a handmade rattle, carved from deer antler, with dried blood stains deep in its grooves. Emil recognized the symbol. Years ago, one night on a forest path, he'd seen it hanging from the neck of a woman. She hadn't told him her name, but in her eyes, he'd seen the sky. Not blue, the kind of sky that had no end. "Sky eyes," Emil said, his voice roughening. Was it her? The boy bowed his head, pressing the rattle to his chest. A chill ran through Emil. Maybe this was the child of the woman he once helped, or her legacy. But at that moment, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. And the wind outside didn't feel like a threat anymore, it felt like a call. But another question had started to grow inside Emil. If this boy had been sent here, then who was following him? And why were they so quiet? As Emil pulled off the boy's deerskin pants that reached down to his knees, His eyes examined the old but sturdy stitching. Every thread told a different story. Maybe it was sewn by his mother, maybe by an elder of his tribe, or maybe it was a gift taken from someone's wrist during a war. Whatever it was, this boy, this young one whose name Emil still didn't know, had to be someone worth saving. Because someone had sent him here, right to Emil's cabin, into the heart of the snow. Coincidence never worked this precisely. The boy still hadn't said his name. Emil hadn't asked. Forcing a name out was like cutting off a sacred song halfway. But eyes, sometimes they said more. That morning, the boy's eyes didn't just hold fear, but responsibility. His small hands still trembled as they held the rattle, but his gaze was fixed on the foggy horizon outside the frozen window. Emil brought in more firewood and tossed it into the stove. With every flame that rose, another memory seemed to burn inside the cabin. Lily's shadow seemed to appear next to the stove, stirring a bowl of soup, or sitting quietly in her old chair, knitting. But that chair was empty now. In its place sat a barefoot Comanche boy. Emil watched him for a while. Whatever else was true, this child wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, neither was he. At first, the sound from outside seemed like just the hum of nature. But Emil had lived long enough to know the difference between wolves and wind. This wasn't an animal. These were footsteps. Careful ones. Then another. Then three. As he grabbed his rifle, he noticed the boy had lifted his head too. That small face, once full of old wounds, now only seemed to consider possibilities. Emil moved slowly toward the window. He wiped the fog from the glass with his hand. No one in sight. But they were there. He could feel it. Then the boy spoke. For the first time. Silence can walk, he said, his voice like a thread barely there. If you can't see, listen. Emil flinched. Who told you that? The boy didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head, listening. Emil fell quiet too, and then they both heard it. A pulse, muffled under the snow. Not a drum, not a footstep, but something. Something was coming. Emil turned back inside and dimmed the lamp. The light leaking from the windows disappeared. The cabin now looked like a grave buried in snow, silent, invisible, but alive. The boy pulled something else from his pocket. This time, it was a piece of parchment. A simple map, drawn in charcoal on leather. A circle, with the symbol of a tree in the middle. Around it, 3 handprints. Emil stared. The handprints represented the ones following him, that much was clear. But the tree inside the circle, it marked Lily's grave. His home. You. Did you come so they could find me? Emil asked. The boy looked away. And in that moment, doubt slipped in. What had been gnawing at Emil suddenly took shape. This boy wasn't alone. And maybe he hadn't come here just to be saved, but to lead others. That night, Emil didn't sleep. He sat in Lily's chair, rifle in hand. Everyone thought the boy was asleep, but he wasn't. He kept tracing the small carvings at the edge of the rattle with his fingers. His eyes were closed, but his mind was wide awake. And a voice echoed endlessly inside him. They're coming, and they're going to test you. Morning came, slowly slipping through the darkened sky. Even the sun itself seemed hesitant to rise. When Emil stepped outside the cabin after a sleepless night, the first thing he noticed was that the tracks on the ground were no longer just a single line. 3 sets of footprints, coming from different directions, meeting at the same point, and then disappearing. And some of those tracks didn't lead back. Emil crouched down and looked carefully. On the frozen surface of the snow, some of the prints were so faint they were almost invisible, as if the ones who walked had spoken to the snow as they passed. He had only seen this kind of silence in war or among mourning people. Knowing how to walk without leaving a sound often came from the same place as knowing how to kill without mercy. When he returned to the cabin, the boy was still on the floor, but something about his face had changed. For the first time since waking, there was unease in his expression. It wasn't the rattle in his hand that caused it, but something else. Emil asked, "They came, didn't they?" The boy lifted his head, but didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something out from under the blanket. A necklace made of 4 carved pieces of deer bone. Each piece had a different symbol engraved: a star, an eye, a flame, and the silhouette of a woman. Emil's chest tightened. Star, eye, flame, and woman. Years ago, he had met a woman by the river. She hadn't asked him anything while braiding her hair. She'd only said, "Sometimes the eyes that judge us are just as scared as we are. But those who fear the fire never find the light." That night, he had given her water. She had left behind a small stone marked with those same symbols. Emil had lost that stone over the years. But now this necklace, it carried the touch of the same hands. "Are you her son?" he asked, for the first time with a voice that mixed awe and real fear. The boy still didn't speak. But just then, the door was knocked 3 times. A deep sound, not threatening, but a challenge to the silence, leaving no space, but offering no violence. Emil grabbed his rifle and moved beside the door. He gave the boy a signal, "Get back." But the boy didn't move. He just shook his head. "No," he said, voice rough. "They won't hide from you this time." The door was knocked again. Emil unlocked it, but didn't open it wide. He left a small crack to peek outside. A woman stood there. A white fur coat, a veil partly covering her face, no gloves on her hands. Her fingers were frozen, but steady. Her eyes, they were the same eyes as the woman he'd once known, just older, harder. Behind her were a few figures waiting on horseback. Hard to make out, but there were at least 10 women. All silent. All eyes locked on Emil's door. But this wasn't a siege. It was a stance. A test. "Are you Emil Hartmann?" the woman asked, in unexpectedly clear English. Emil nodded slightly. "Who's asking?" The woman stepped closer and pointed to the boy. "He's one of ours. But he's not only ours anymore." Emil's throat went dry. "What does that mean?" She stared without blinking. "We didn't follow him. We followed you. Years ago, you saved one of ours. She chose you. Now it's our turn." Emil opened the door a little wider. "What do you want?" The woman reached under her coat. She pulled out a small leather pouch. Emil recognized it immediately. One of the pouches Lily used to keep. Hand-stitched, decorated with thistle patterns. Is this Lily's?" Emil asked, voice shaking. The woman nodded. "Years ago, one of us gave it to her. And inside it, there was a promise she took from you. We've come to take that promise now. But not with weapons, with silence. And choice." At that moment, Emil turned and looked at the boy. For the first time, he saw warmth in his eyes. The boy stood up, knees shaking but tall and steady. He walked outside with the elk horn rattle in his hand. Emil didn't stop him. When the woman saw the rattle, she bowed her head. The women behind her got off their horses. And Emil watched, one by one, as all 10 of them knelt on the ground. Even the snow beneath their knees fell quiet. This wasn't a battlefield anymore, it was a place of decision. The rifle slipped from Emil's hands to the ground. He didn't need it anymore. Then the wind started again. But it wasn't a threat now, it was a song. Like the wordless melody Lily used to hum. And in that moment, Emil understood. This boy didn't just deserve protection. This boy was a calling. That afternoon, the wind changed direction. The cold slipping between the mountains now came not from the north, but from the west. Emil noticed it while watching the steam rise from his tea inside. The boy now no longer someone he could simply call a boy, but a young warrior with deep, searching eyes sat silently by the fire. They didn't speak much, but what they said mattered. Because sometimes a look said more than 100 words. Especially when every word had a price. The women were still outside. Their numbers had grown. There had been 10 in the morning, now more than 25. All the same, not on horseback, but kneeling quietly in the snow. They held no weapons, but every one of them stood like a woman who had seen war. What bound them together wasn't sound but stillness. Inside Emil's mind, the silence was like a scream. He couldn't find answers to his questions. When had Lily met these women? How had her path crossed with this boy's? And most of all, why had she chosen him, Emil? But Emil wasn't the only one thinking. That late afternoon, another kind of hum approached the cabin. Not the sound of the wild, but the sound of civilization. The footsteps were uneven, because those who came weren't walking out of anger but fear. When Emil looked out the window, he saw 4 men climbing the valley slope. He knew every one of them. Ray, the town's horse fixer. Boone, the ex-soldier who lived and breathed whiskey. The Tannen brothers, who were more noise than sense. And in front, Sheriff Clive Hammond. They had come. When they reached the front of the cabin, they stopped. The women didn't move. 25 pairs of eyes quietly studied the men. This wasn't a battlefield anymore, it was a place of judgment. The sheriff shouted, "Emil, you in there?" Before opening the door, Emil touched his rifle but didn't pick it up. He just glanced at the boy. The young one had chosen to stay in the shadows. Hidden, but alert. "What do you want, Clive?" Emil asked, standing at the threshold. The sheriff squinted. "Heard you're hiding someone in there. Someone who doesn't belong. Maybe someone dangerous. Emil's face tightened. I'm not hiding anyone. I'm protecting him. Ray stepped forward. Ain't that the same thing? No, Emil said. Hiding is keeping something out of sight. This boy is right here. In plain view. In my heart. The sheriff shook his head. If 25 women are following him, there's a reason. And no good reason at that. This is our land. Our laws. This quiet waiting doesn't bring us peace. We need to stay alert. Then the boy's voice cut through. Low but clear. I'm not their secret, he said. The men fell into silence. One of the Tannen brothers even glanced behind him because that voice didn't sound like a child's. It sounded like an echo from the past. Emil spoke without backing down. This boy doesn't represent what you're afraid of. He represents what you've forgotten. Boone growled. You giving us a lesson, Emil? What are you now, some mountain prophet? Or the tribe's voice? Emil's eyes darkened. I lost someone. Lily. And she saved someone. Maybe you've never saved anyone. Maybe all you've ever done is be afraid. The sheriff reached for his belt. Not his gun, his hesitation. If this boy stays here, he said, the town will be scared. And a scared town can't think straight. We like you, Emil. But how far can we let the line stretch? Emil quietly turned around. He signaled to the boy. The young one stepped to the door, holding up the rattle. This, he said, isn't a noise. It's a reminder. So we don't forget who we are. Then suddenly, the silence outside broke. Footsteps coming from the forest rhythmic, like drums. Everyone turned at the same time. The women began to rise. They moved across the snow without leaving a mark. There weren't dozens anymore, there were over 50, and they stopped right at the doorstep. Emil opened the door wide. The women didn't kneel. This time they stood, and just by standing, they said everything. One stepped forward. Her face was covered, but her hands were bare, and in her hands, she held a small pouch. She offered it to Emil. Inside were a lock of hair, a piece of lace, and Lily's necklace. Emil's knees nearly buckled. He recognized the necklace. Lily had once put it in his pocket. One day there'll be darkness, she had told him. But this will help you keep your eyes open in it. The sheriff backed off. The men said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. And for the first time, Emil said it out loud. This isn't a shelter anymore. It's a beginning. When the women knelt in a circle across the snow-covered land, even the wind seemed to lose its direction. It blew neither left nor right. Those white shadows surrounding the cabin in a perfect line weren't enclosing a town, they were enclosing a memory. Some of them held rattles in their hands. Some looked up to the sky with empty palms. But they all wore the same expression, not of demanding an end, but of asking for what was right. As Emil held Lily's necklace in his hand, he felt that old stone settle back into his throat. He had thought he'd been alone for years, but sometimes loneliness was just not being able to stand the sound of your own voice. Now, even that inner voice was silent. Hundreds of eyes watched him from outside, but they weren't judging. They were waiting for an answer not from a chosen man but a tested one. At that moment, the boy inside stood up. His name still hadn't been spoken aloud, but in Emil's mind, he had one, stern meaning star. No longer a child, but someone born and raised at the edge of something. That edge ran not through land, but through history and heart. Stern walked to the window. He looked at the women, then turned to Emil. They, he said, voice like an echo of a whisper, didn't come just for me. They came for you, too. Not with weapons, but with remembering. Emil's hands trembled. Remembering, he repeated, has always hurt me the most. Stern bowed his head. Sometimes pain is the material of the bridge. At that moment, a new figure approached from outside. A woman, older than the others. Her face was uncovered, her hair dark and streaked with gray, braided tightly. She wore a fur cloak, and around her neck was an old amulet embossed with silver. There was no anger or haste in her steps, but in her posture, you could read the weight of a decision. Emil didn't know her, but something in his instincts told him. This woman had seen Lily years ago. Maybe they had walked together, stayed silent together, hidden certain truths together. The woman stood directly in front of Emil and spoke a single word. They forgot us. Emil couldn't answer. She continued, but we forgot no one. Not the one who saved us. Not the one who burned us. And not you. Emil felt his knees weaken. I was never brave, he said. I was just there. The woman nodded. Sometimes being there is everything. Just then, a new sound rose from the valley hoofbeats. But this time, those who came didn't belong to silence. For men climbing the slope, followed by several others with guns. Town folks. They carried rifles, and unease was written on their faces. Sheriff Clive was in front, with Ray, Boone, the Tannen brothers, and two new faces behind him. Their eyes scanned the women, but none stepped forward. Clive shouted, "Enough! Whatever this is, end it. This land used to be peaceful. You brought the silence of the grave." The women didn't move a muscle. Emil stepped forward. "Clive," he said, "this isn't the silence of a grave. It's a mother's final request. It's the acceptance of repentance. This silence is the name of peace." The sheriff pointed at Stern. "That boy is the spark in all this. We're taking him. The town is scared, and I can't live with that fear." Stern stepped forward. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't run. "I didn't bring a war, but I brought a choice, and that choice is no longer yours." Clive reached for his weapon, but just then, one of the women stepped forward. She held something, a small, worn cloth pouch. From it, she pulled out Lily's old journal. Emil recognized it. The pages were almost falling apart, but they were still filled with Lily's handwriting. The woman held it out to Clive. "Inside," she said, "is a life written in both your language and ours. That life deserves this silence." Clive took the journal with hesitation. He flipped through the pages. A drawing fell out, Stern's mother's face, and just below it, Lily's note. "If this child ever returns here one day, look into his eyes. If the fire still burns in them, then that fire is your salvation too." Clive slowly lowered his hands. He slung his rifle across his back. I only wanted to protect," Emil answered. "Sometimes, protection means stopping." The sheriff and his men backed away. None of them said a word. At that moment, the air in the valley changed. It was as if even the sky took a deep breath. The women knelt once again, but this time, they whispered not prayers but thanks. A vow was being spoken. Eyes may close, but memory does not. This land is now not just the home of the past, but the home of a new beginning. And as Emil placed Lily's necklace around Stern's neck, he felt a door open within himself, too. That fire hadn't gone out, but it no longer burned. It warmed. Even in the darkest moment of the night, the fire inside the cabin didn't go out. Emil sat in the old chair, watching Stern's silence. The boy, no longer a boy, was kneeling by the hearth, carving something into a flat pine board in front of him. Every carve was like a wound etched into wood. Emil didn't say a word. After that night, speaking often felt unnecessary, because some words belonged to the sky now. When Stern lifted the board he had carved, Emil came closer. There was a figure on it, a woman carrying a child on her back. Around them, stars, a path curling toward the sky, and kneeling figures along the edges. All of them with bare hands touching the ground, heads tilted upward. "Who is this?" Emil asked. Stern didn't reply, but his eyes gave enough of an answer. That morning, as the sun rose like a line across the icy horizon, Emil placed a table outside the cabin. He stacked Lily's letter, her necklace, the blue beaded cloth left by the woman, and Stern's carved board on top of each other. Then they buried them all inside a small monument made of stones, right next to Lily's grave. It wasn't a headstone. It was a reminder. Before sunrise, the women left in groups of 2 and 3. They rode their horses quietly up the mountain slopes. They left no trace, no sign, just a few soft impressions in the snow. And in the center, a sacred space opened by the circle. Iron Bird was the last to leave. She handed Stern a small silver mirror. "Your mother carried this," she said. "She left it so you wouldn't forget yourself. But when you look at it, don't search for someone else's eyes. You're only yourself." When she left, Emil and Stern returned to the cabin together. For the first time in years, Emil left the door wide open, and the wind that came in didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like a greeting. That evening, Stern found one of Lily's old notebooks. He flipped through the pages, some stained, some blank. But on one page, written in Lily's old ink pen, was this sentence: "Sometimes saving someone means letting them save you." Stern closed the notebook and gently put it back. He sat down beside Emil. There was a fire between them, but this time it was fed not by wood but by quiet acceptance. Outside, the moon hung in the sky like a white ghost. The stars looked closer than they ever had before. And at that moment, Emil noticed something. The wind was carrying a tune. The lullaby Lily used to hum years ago, the one with no words but endless meaning. It stirred something deep in his chest. "She's watching you," Emil said. Stern nodded. "And letting me be, because I'm not afraid anymore." That night, a small second fire was lit outside the cabin. Emil and Stern sat in silence for a while beside Sky in her eyes' grave. Emil poured a small cup of coffee onto the earth, and Stern placed his rattle next to the headstone. "Let her be quiet now," he said, because her voice stayed inside me. The next day, no one from town dared come near Emil's house, but none of them turned back either. They, too, grew in their own silence. Over time, the smoke rising from Emil's cabin stopped looking like a threat and began to feel like balance. Some bowed their heads, some warned their children not to get close, but all of them, deep down, accepted that something different now lived there. A season passed. Autumn leaves covered the earth. Emil sat on the porch with Stern, and together they began carving another figure into a newly cut board. This time, there was a man at the center, his hands empty, but his eyes turned upward. Beside him, not a small child, but a young man standing level. Between them, a fire, but this time, it burned nothing. It warmed, and that was the end. We're just a few steps away from reaching our first 1,000 subscribers, our growing family. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you to everyone who's brought us this far. With your support, we grow stronger with every story. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the